We really appreciate that in terms of both time to prepare and time to attend. We've got some important discussions, I think, today. So, Ross, unless there's anything else from the administrative side, I think maybe we'll kick straight off with item 1.
Yes, just one quick point from my side, not related to this meeting, but just in relation to the forum. Thank you to all members, TAs, observers who will be attending the forum and have started to register. If you haven't registered yet and you're planning to come, please do as soon as possible. And for those who staff have reached out to ask about participating in panels and different parts of the forum, thank you for agreeing and for working with staff on this. And it's shaping up to be a very good forum with very strong attendance. So hope everybody can make time to join us in Lisbon for the forum. Over to you, Ian.
Okay, thanks, Ross. So without further ado, we'll move on to item 1, and Saya, over to you.
Thanks, Ian, and hello, everyone. So we have a very quick session today to go over the progress on the work program consultation to date and any significant feedback on the document. So I'm not sure if slides here. Is Augustina sharing the slides, or do I share them directly?
You should share them, Say, if you have them ready to go.
Okay. Here, apologies. Can you see them now?
We can,
Yeah,
but not in
I'm not in presentation mode at the moment, so.
Okay. Are they showing up for you now?
That's good.
Okay, excellent. Sorry about that. So just a quick session to go over the progress on the work program consultation to date. Since the first agenda paper is just for information purposes, so agenda item 1.2.1, and this just goes over the steps. Since the June meeting, we've incorporated the comments from the board and the CAG from June into the document, and we've also sent the document to the PIC for their feedback. After this meeting, we'll incorporate any feedback from this meeting, and thank you to members who have already sent comments in advance. We appreciate that. And we'll also incorporate the comments that we get back from the PIC for the September meeting, with the goal for us to have a document for approval at the September board meeting. We'll also be using this document as part of the forum in September. So that's one of the reasons we ask that members send in any editorial comments by the end of this week so that we can get that document prepared for the forum and for the September board meeting. And then the next agenda item just walks through, agenda item 1.2.2 walks through the detailed changes that we've made since June. So in paragraph 6 of that agenda item, there's a table that walks through all the changes from the board's instructions and also incorporates the CAG's feedback. So you can see where the changes were made through the document. So the question for the board is just, do you agree with the recommendation that the board's actions and instructions be actioned as outlined in detail in that agenda item? And then are there any other substantive comments that anyone wants to raise in the meeting today? So I'll turn it back to the chair.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So are there any additional points that members want to raise in terms of what's been done so far, or any issues with the document that you've got before you? Yeah, Mike.
So thank you, Chair. Just a very slight comment, not on the content. I'm very fine with that. It's more on the general appearance, as we have now the final versions lying in front of us. I have the feeling that there's some room for improvement in terms of using the colors. I'm very fine with the list of documents where we differentiate between green for sustainability reporting projects and for the classical the blue color, but it is different from as we use it in I think it must be on page 5 in the timelines. So my suggestion advice would be to rework the colors in that document so that you have a consistent approach using this colors. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I think we can take that away and make sure it all ties together. Agree, that's important to avoid any confusion. Renee, to you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Sorry, it took me a while to find my mute button. Yes, so in the technical director's note, I believe, is it page 5 of the draft document? So I see that staff has undertaken to clarify there that we will have a bit less capacity than we had originally expected when we first drafted this because of the now phase 2 project for climate-related disclosures. And we added the text that we would have room for potentially 2 projects, one starting in 2026, or 2027, and one in 26, 27, 27, 28. But we still say 3 projects. So it seems there's a bit of inconsistency. I'm not sure if we should just change this to 2 projects so that the sentence hangs together.
Okay, thanks, Renee. Ross, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think I take the point, Renee, and I mean, we've kind of, even in the staff, we've been kicking this around a little bit as we think there is up to 3 we might be able to do, but it's dependent on everything going completely perfect on the work program, and the exact timing is not known. So it might be better just to signal 2, and then give the timelines we've given on one in 2026, 2027, and then another in 2028. Should we over deliver on that, that's probably not a bad thing. And if we're in a position in 2028 to start a 3rd project, then we could do so.
Renee, back on that.
Yep. Okay. No, that's good. And are you taking comments on the draft list, or are you taking comments on everything right now, or just on that first document?
No, I mean, if you've got another comment, Renee, then please go ahead.
Yes. So in the draft list of projects, so we re-entitled projects previously considered by the board in that appendix, and we added there a project, which makes sense. I really don't have an issue with that. The project on sorry, I'm looking through my documents this morning, and I have to sort through.
Is it the climate related and other uncertainties?
Yes, yes. So it seems like the rationale for this one is not, it's a new project that we're undertaking because of the IASB undertaking it. And I'm not sure it fits under that heading that we changed, right? That we had it already proposed in the past and we're bringing it forward. So it seems like it's the only one that's kind of an odd one now that doesn't necessarily fit properly with the title of that list. So instead of like reshaping everything, maybe it's as easy as maybe putting a footnote or just a little note recognizing that I don't think this one we had previously considered it.
Yeah, we can clarify that. Thanks, Renee.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Renee. Any other points? Obviously, as Sarah has said, please, if you've got further edits, then please do pass those over. No, that's good. So I think that's very helpful then in terms of that gives us a document in good shape to go round to participants in the forum. Ross, I was just thinking it might be helpful for the board if we just summarised how we were proposing that the forum would feed into that final debate for the board.
Sure. And apologies, members, you don't have more information on this in a paper, but we've been talking with Ian on this as we work on the forum this week while we have him with us in Toronto. But our thinking is the forum obviously starts on the Monday and then plays into the Tuesday morning. and then we go into actual board session following our lunch break. And given the forum is going to be focused around getting input and initial feedback on what we might do next on the work program, we think we'll make the work program the item the board discusses in the afternoon. And the board will hopefully look to finalize the document that you're seeing here today with all of the changes and guidance we've given, as well as the various project lists that will be a separate document that we put on the website. And we'll take feedback we've heard during the forum, which is very much built on getting input into the various projects and what the landscape of potential projects could look like, taking input and feedback from participants, and then the board can debate that in the afternoon in session and ask questions to the proponents of various different projects, take feedback, have a proper discussion, and then amend our official project lists that will be on the website along with the consultation document that sets out our resources, our timelines, and the open call for projects. So that way constituents will have a full and updated list of projects and a good debate on that. So when constituents are replying to the consultation, they'll be able to look to that as a guide to help them with their pitch on which projects that are priorities for them. And the board will have had time to vet and make sure that it is a viable international project to be added to the project list. So it won't be a rubber stamp just because people say, well, we think the board should do this. The board would still have that debate in the afternoon around the project criteria to make sure it does meet the international lens. It's not simply a local priority because it's not in the local framework, even though we've got guidance or things like that. And again, this is kind of an evolution of how we've done our project updates in the past. So, that's kind of the thinking. You will have a paper in September that kind of sets out how this process is going to work so that it's clear on how the transition from the forum occurs. And I think the real benefit of this is forum participants will actually have the opportunity to engage the board as a board on these project priorities and have a real discussion about the types of projects the board might do in the future. And I really think that's, in talking to various standard centers around the world who are interested in coming, that's been one of the things they've found attractive about this version of the forum is the direct link to the board itself and the high probability that almost all board members should be at the forum and certainly be there on day one of the meeting. So I think that's it for me, Ian, unless there's any, comments that members want to raise.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, as you say, I mean, obviously this is evolving at the moment, but given that a number of the national standard setters are likely to effectively be in the public gallery for the afternoon session on the Tuesday as we debate it, I think that gives very good accountability, in terms of and demonstrates how the board has, reviewed and assessed the feedback on additional projects, and they can see that real time in terms of us finalising the document. And I think, we would not anticipate that there would be any major changes to the actual main consultation document, but it would be that list of projects that, could well be augmented as a result of the forum discussions. As Ross said, I think it's going to be quite an innovative session, but and we'll give you details about how it will work and how you can question participants later in the morning before the afternoon session. I think we'll have a good process there. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Please pass final edits to Saya, and thank you, Saya, for all the work in terms of coordinating that. And obviously, we'll have a report back as well on any comments from the PIC as a result of that process that we're running in parallel.
Great.
Good.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Saya. So I think that concludes the work programme consultation item. So we move on then to item 2, which is natural resources. And Edwin, that's over to you to update on progress since June and to discuss the new items.
Thanks, Ian. So let me share my slides. So I'll jump right into the presentation because I have to go through 8 papers. But so for this check-in project, our goal is to cover the remaining specific issues that were identified in April. So I've listed them here. We have 1 paper on each of those topics. After this check-in in September, the plan is to bring back a paper on the revised definition of tangible natural resources held for conservation. And that was the key issue that was outstanding from the June meeting. And then we will also present the draft final IPSASB for the board to review. So a page flip at the September meeting. And in October for the check-in, we will have more time for the board to review the draft IPSASB standard. And assuming all goes well, then our plan is for December, we will have a short approval paper to go through the final approval of the standard. So I'll take down a slide in case anyone has any comments at this point.
Thanks, Edwin. Any questions on that proposed timeline? Okay, good. Thank you, Edwin. So I think that's clear. So if you move us on to the first substantive discussion item.
Okay, so the first paper, issues paper is on depreciation. And these papers, just so a bit of background, these papers are ordered in the way that the SMCs were written in the ED. So the first issue is depreciation. And if board members recalled, we proposed a rebuttable presumption to not depreciate tangible natural resources in the ED. And staff's view is that based on the fact that we're changing now to tangible natural resources held for conservation, there is even stronger support or stronger reasons to have this rebuttable presumption in scope. To have this rebuttable presumption. And that's consistent with what most of the respondents said. Some of the respondents, though, did wanted more guidance on what factors we should consider when analyzing the presumption, and also more explicit guidance on how this presumption interacts with the impairment requirements, if any. So staff's proposal is to retain a rebuttable presumption, but clarify in the AGs that, to add the factors of when this presumption can be rebutted. And the plan is to look to IPSASB 45, so PPNE, and look to the factors to determine whether a PPNE is a finite life item or has an indefinite life. And we're not going to copy and paste those factors, but we're going to take those principles and apply them to natural resources held for conservation and come up with factors that way. And then the other proposal from staff is that we're going to explicitly talk about how, regardless of whether an entity has concluded that the tangible natural resource has a finite life or indefinite life, you still have to apply IPSASB 21, or impairment of non-cash generating items or assets. And under that standard, you would essentially have to consider indicators of impairment at each reporting date. So even if you have concluded that something is of indefinite life, it doesn't mean that you get to ignore impairment. You would still have to apply that standard. So I'll stop here for any comments from the board.
Okay, thanks, Edwin. So open for comments from board members. Yeah, Renee.
Yes, I just want to say that I totally agree with our decision. Respondents were in majority supportive of it. And also because I think, and one good point that Edwin made in the paper is we've now rescoped the standard to natural resources held for conservation. So I think in that particular scenario, I think that the rebuttable presumption is even more justified. So that made it for me in terms of one of the key rationale for why we're accepting this.
Great, Thanks, Renee. I think it's important in these cases to get positive feedback, not just silence is taken as assent. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other hands raised. So I think, Edwin, we're content to go ahead with that. And obviously, we'll see the drafting on that back in September.
Okay. So the next paper is on the proposed exemption from certain disclosures on rare or endangered resources. And in ED 92, there was a proposal to exempt certain disclosures for these natural resources. And some respondents, most respondents were supportive of the exemption, but some did ask for specific clarifications. Specifically, there were some questions on what is meant by rare or endangered, and how should an entity determine that if one of their resources is rare or endangered. And then also there were comments that asked for what specific disclosures are exempted if this exemption is applicable. And the reason for that was because in the ED, it essentially listed the entire disclosure paragraphs and said, you would have to apply judgment. But so staff went back and reconsidered this, and we thought the exemption is still appropriate because we did get a lot of support. So we propose that we should retain the exemption. But we do recognize that, that we have to describe the terms rare or endangered. So we did some research and we found that the plain English definitions of these terms are already very clear. So I've included those in the paper. And endangered is defined as being seriously at risk of extinction, and rare is essentially just uncommon, scarce, or infrequently encountered. And being rare does not automatically mean that something is endangered. So we've also looked to, whether how the determination or the designation of rare or endangered is commonly determined. And we've noted that there were a lot of third-party organizations that already comes up with lists of endangered species or rare items. And so what our proposal is retain the exemption and then add clarifications in the application guidance to first describe what the terms rare and endangered mean. And then we're also going to explain that when an entity is determining whether something is rare or endangered, it is okay or it is acceptable to look to the determination of the status based on lists from third parties, but it is also up to the entity's discretion and their judgment. So we're leaving that door open a bit. And in terms of what specific disclosures, staff thought about, what exactly are the issues or the disclosures that may lead to further endangerment of these resources. So the few things that we have focused on is that definitely you do not want to talk about the location or the value or how many of these resources are left, because that's essentially inviting scrutiny or inviting nefarious activities towards these resources. So we plan to specify in the exemption that only certain specific disclosures such as location, value, and the number of resources are to be exempted. You would still have to provide general qualitative discussions or disclosures for these resources. So I'll stop there for comments on this issue.
Okay, thanks, Edwin. Comments from members? Yeah, Karen, and then Sunjin. So Karen first.
Thanks very much for this. And it's for me, it's an interesting topic, having wrestled with it myself in the context of non-profit organizations and what we've called sensitive information, and had a lot of toing and froing about the benefits of providing an exemption. Particularly I was experiencing a tension between the desire for people not to report on what are clearly quite sensitive things, but also flagging that an exemption had been used. There was concern that actually by flagging that an exemption has been used, you kind of raise a red flag and say, look here, there's something to be looked at. And so we wrestled with this quite significantly, and we ended up not putting an exemption in, but to use aggregation as a way of trying to remove from sensitive information. So I kind of wanted to sort of explain that as a context of something that I've wrestled with, but I think I'm kind of what I was trying to get to, and I think you've alluded to it, is kind of what is the sensitive, what is the information here that leads to risk, and are you creating another issue by having an exemption? Because will people who want that information from an accountability perspective then kind of question any of the other disclosures that go alongside this standard? So not an answer, but really a question about kind of some of the thinking that's gone into this.
Thanks, Karen. So I think what I'll do is I'll take comments from the other three members who have flags up, and then Edwin, I'll come back to you. Sunjin next. Oh, you're on mute, Sunjin.
Sorry about that. Now you can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, no, I totally agree with staff recommendation about providing more detailed explanation about the meaning of rare and endangered. And I see in the paper a saying that similar to IPSASB 19, it is a matter of judgment. What is rare, or how rare is rare, or what is endangered? Yeah, I agree with that. It's a matter of judgment, but a little different from other concepts and issues. From my standpoint, this is not traditional or conventional accounting concept. I don't think it has been introduced in accounting standard setting before. So I think it's helpful if we provide way more detailed explanation and description about what do we mean by rare and endangered in the context of financial reporting. So in that sense, I totally agree with staff's recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Sunjin. Adrien, good to see you.
Thank you, Ian. I'm sorry for my being late. I had trouble with the connection. Well, as you know, I'm always worried with the respondents or preparers in general who trying to push the boards towards a rules-based standards. I really believe that if we start providing definitions of what rare means, what endangered means, when we have to provide definitions for each and everything. For instance, species, resource, biological, what is biological, etc., etc. So I think that the proposal to provide an AG or more information about what is to be exempted in the AG makes sense. And also, I think the paper rightly underlines that it is for the preparers to make their own judgment and have a discussion with their auditors in the application of the standard. In the end, if they are wrong, I mean, the auditors will reject or qualify their financial reports. So there's not much to say, just possibly explain for the exemptions, maybe not what is the definition of rare or endangered.
Thanks, Adrien. Mike, to you, and then back to Edwin.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. I agree to staff's recommendation. However, I think that exemption here is used to a certain inconsistent way in our ED 92. That is because what we are discussing here, that is for the recognized natural resources. And if you come to the section for unrecognized natural resources, we have nearly the same requirements about location, quantity, availability, and so on. So my suggestion would be to insert that same exemption also for the paragraphs which deal with the unrecognized natural resources? Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Edwin, back to you.
Yeah, so I'll tackle the easy one first. So I totally agree that the exemption should apply to recognized and unrecognized. So I'll make sure to fix that. On the actual definition, so I don't think this needs to be a formal definition. It's more of a description. And as Sunjin brought up, it's more because this is a new concept in financial reporting. So I think it would be helpful to at least describe what is meant by rare or endangered, because this isn't really everyday accounting. And going back to Karen's point, so the genesis of this exemption was really based on accounting requirements in South Africa, where they also have a standard on living and non-living resources. And in that jurisdiction, they were actually having a lot of difficulties or a lot of issues where they would have poachers going to reservations and to parks to look for endangered animals to essentially poach them. And so this was really based on the South African experience, and they have experience where it is a red flag to say that yes, we are applying this exemption, but at the same time, like the people who are interested in that information would already know. So it's not really like you're highlighting it for people who are new to that scene to go out and look for these animals. They already know. So it's really you're limiting the amount of exposure for these resources rather than highlighting that yes, this is out there. Yeah.
Karen, did you want to come back on that? Because it was a different approach, I think. And then I'll go to Scott.
Yeah, no, look, I completely get that. I guess I guess there's a question about the trade-off between accountability and transparency, and safety and security, and not wanting to cause harm as a result of that. So I completely get that tension that exists. I think my question was, can you achieve the same thing in terms of not having to disclose that without raising the red flag? And so the way that we'd considered this was around using the established principles around aggregation to avoid having to provide information that could be misused in that way, rather than effectively drawing attention to the fact that there's information that you haven't disclosed. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there, because that's a thinking process that we have been through. But obviously, that's probably better informed by those who are kind of close to that issue. But I just wanted to share that, because I say it's a thinking process that we've been through, and it really is around where you think the risk comes from in the context of those disclosures, and as I say, the trade-off between accountability and ensuring that there's no harm arising from the disclosures.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So Scott, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Karen, when you made your comment, that's why I raised my flag. Just to explain a corollary, which may be helpful to the board, the U.S. Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board issued a standard on actually security, disclosing things in financial statements that would disclose a national security. So if you think about it, it's the same conversation. Do you want to put things in? And so we went through that, and we actually, Karen, went to your point, and we aggregated it, but then we disclosed we did it. So you get there one way or the other. So even if you allow them to aggregate it, you still got to let the people know you did it. Okay, so I'm not sure it totally solved the problem, but that's what we ended up doing. It took about a year. I understand your total dialogue on that. We debated that a lot, but that's what we came up with. So we covered it up. I use that term. We covered it up with aggregation, but then we told the world we did it. So just to comment on your comment about that. And I do have one other question. When it comes to talking about the footnote, are we going to use those items as examples or requirements? I was a little concerned on the way the paper's written, where you said these definitely would be and these would not. They may be circumstances that may not be true. So we may want to use that list more of examples and requirements, just more high level than as opposed to indicating something would or would not.
Okay, thanks for that, Scott. So Edwin, I think we'll leave you with that, to iterate on that point in terms of those with Scott. I think what I'm hearing from members is support from for the proposed way forward. Not, no ideal solution, I think, as we've heard from both Karen and Scott. And I think, we need to make sure that that is appropriately communicated in the basis for conclusions, just in terms of the way we've looked at that, and also the, if you like, the examples from other standard setters in concluding in terms of the way forward.
Mhm.
Okay. So no other flags raised. So I think if we move on to the next item, Edwin.
The next paper is on cross-references to IPSAS 45. So in ED92, we did cross-reference to PP&E for certain guidance on disclosures of current value and also the determination of cost in an exchange transaction. And the reason we did that was because essentially back then it was a very generic ED that essentially use the same principles as PP&E. So now that we are changing the scope or refining the scope to focus on conservation, that does give us support to change some of these, the approach we used in ED92. But more importantly, quite a few respondents actually wrote in and did not agree with the use of cross-references. Some of them raised that because PP&E and ED92 were structured so differently, just a simple cross-reference would cause a lot of confusion in terms of measurement and also disclosures. And some respondents actually raised the fact that the IPSASB had previously decided to have a separate standard from PP&E on tangible natural resources, and yet it's strange that we have so many cross-references back to PP&E. So they thought there was a conflict with this earlier decision. And so a few other respondents also said that by using these cross-references, there may be unintended consequences, because back then in ED92, the scope was very broad and they didn't really know what items would fall within the scope of ED92. So based on all this feedback, staff's recommendation is just to remove the cross-references to PP&E and instead use the principles from PP&E to come up with measurement and disclosure guidance that is specific to tangible natural resources held for conservation. So that in staff's view would resolve all the issues that were raised by respondents.
Thanks, Edwin. Comments on staff proposals? So I'm not seeing any flags. Karen?
Just as no one else went, I was just to say that I agree with staff's proposals, particularly as somebody who didn't see the need for a separate standard. If it is different, then it is different. And so the cross-references shouldn't be there. So I absolutely support that as an approach.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So I think, I think we're content to move forward on that basis, Edwin. So thank you for the paper. So move us on to the next item.
So the next item is on transition. So back in ED92, we did propose two retrospective approaches. One was full retrospective applying IPSAS 3, and the other one is a modified retrospective where essentially you only had to recognize items that you still controlled or the entity still controlled on the date of application of the standard. So most respondents generally agreed with the provision. The one comment that we did get a few times was some constituents were concerned that on initial application of the standard, you may have items that you cannot measure at current value, or the entity is not able to measure at current value. So they were asking if we can have a fully prospective approach. And staff thought about that, but we also noted that way back when we did consider the approaches and finalize the ED, the IPSASB made a conscious decision to not have a prospective only approach, because a lot of natural resources are existing items or existing resources in a jurisdiction. So if we were to provide a prospective approach, there could be some situations where nothing would be recognized when you applied the standard. So we do recognize though, staff do recognize though, that there could be a lot of tangible natural resources that cannot be measured on application of the standard. But what the standard actually says is if you conclude that something is an asset, but you cannot reliably measure it, then all you have to do is provide disclosures. And that also applies on initial application of the standard, even though that's not explicitly made clear in the transitional provisions. So staff's recommendation is to continue with the two retrospective approaches, but also clarify that if you have assets that, or if you have tangible natural resources that meet the definition of an asset, but you cannot measure them or you cannot recognize them because they cannot be measurable, then only disclosures are required upon initial application of the standard.
Thanks, Edwin. So open for comments then on that proposed way through. So I'm not seeing any flags raised on that. I think clearly we do need to describe that thought process in the basis for conclusions, along the lines of the summary you've just given, Edwin. But I think we are content to maintain that approach with that additional explanation. Okay, so move us on then to the next item.
Okay, the next paper is on amendments to heritage assets. So in ED 92, there was a proposed amendment to IPSAS 45 to delete the references to environmental or natural features in the description of heritage assets. Most respondents agreed with that amendment, but some respondents rightly pointed out that if an item is already a heritage asset under IPSAS 45, it would actually not be within the scope of ED 92. And even though we haven't finalized the definition of a tangible natural resource held for conservation based on the preliminary discussions we've had in June, this observation would continue to hold true. That is, if something is a heritage asset, then most likely it would not be within the scope of the final IPSAS on tangible natural resources held for conservation. So because of that, staff is proposing to remove the proposed amendment entirely and just leave heritage assets as is in IPSAS 45. So this is one of the areas where I did get comments from Andrew and Angela before the meeting, and they were concerned that there might be some constituents who would still want some form of guidance to help distinguish between heritage assets and tangible natural resources held for conservation. So I think one way to address this issue would be to add probably application guidance to explain that the heritage assets in PP&E are items that meet the definition of PP&E and are also being conserved, whereas items that are tangible natural resources held for conservation are not currently used to provide services or to produce items. So that's one way I think we can address that issue. So I will take that on the slide for the board to discuss.
Okay. So it seems to me, I think we have to be very careful about that additional explanation because it basically goes back to what's the scope of the standard. And I think we just need to remind people about the scope rather than provide a lot of extra drafting and potentially dig holes by giving too much detail. And it may be we're better off actually just rather than kind of put more detail in that you explain, you end up blurring the issue. Ross, and then I'll go to Claudia.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult point because I think it comes back to a point that Hervé Adrienne made earlier on, are we trying to be very specific and tell people how to apply our standards by baking rules into them? Or is it a principle based where the preparer makes a judgment call based on the scope of the various standards and determining what they're applying? So if they think they have property, plant, and equipment that's heritage, they should be in 45, and that standard clearly deals with that. If they think they're in tangible natural resources and they're holding them for conservation, then we've got the principles here. But ultimately, there's a judgment call that needs to be made, and that's for the preparer to make in terms of its considerations and in communication with their auditors who are going to challenge them on their judgments. But I'm not sure being more specific is actually going to help with the problem. Because once you start writing rules, it starts to descend into a laundry list of more explanation and guidance. So I can understand some want clarity on this. I guess the question is that implementation clarity supposed to come from this board? I think people want clarity of the principles from this board, not clarity on exactly how they'll be applied. And I think we're going down that route right now with this issue on heritage.
Yeah, I was seeing support for what you were saying there, Ross. Anyway, I will take further comments then from Claudia and Renee at this stage. Claudia, to you first.
Thank you. I wouldn't limit it to heritage assets. It's also delineation between PP&A, because we saw in the past, especially for national park, there's a delivering of services to the public, at least in the European countries, because normally you're allowed to walk through the national park to use the footpath. So maybe there could be in our finer definitions of or scoping that we have something in it, something like the primary intended use. We use this already to a delineation between operation capacity or financial capacity. What is the primary use? If you have a national park or it's for leisuring. So I think at least we should think about to give a kind of what we mean with services. In the past, we understood, at least in our jurisdiction, that national park is a services to the public, at least because we have this usable pathway, we have maybe also clean air or whatever. So I think I understand what Ross said, that we, and also of Adrian, that we should be really make sure that we don't have any rules in it, but we should at least give a little bit more flavor what is the principle or the delineation which one is in which standard.
Okay, thanks, Claudia. Renee?
Yes, thank you. I support additional application guidance, but I think one of the points that we need to make, in reality, you can find an heritage item, an heritage item that meets the definition of an asset, either in PP&E or in natural resource held for conservation. When we look at how we described a heritage asset in IPSASB 45, we made reference, for example, to their archaeological nature, right? So something that relates to archaeology is going to be probably a natural resource, right? Some sort of a land, an area that has archaeological substance. And also the natural asset definition refers to preserving that for heritage in future. So I see overlap. I could very well see that we find a heritage asset in both standards. So I agree with removing the scope out, because I think it could be in 45, but it could also be in our new standard. And I think that the application guidance, or maybe the basis for conclusion, should state that fact. And then to me, it's clear that it can be either or, depending on the nature and of that asset.
So thank you for those contributions. I mean, I think where we get to is the fundamental issue here, is the delineation between this proposed IPSAS and property, plant and equipment. And that's the proposed delineation that needs elaboration, and you know, Claudia referred to a number of the issues and so on. So I think we will have that discussion when we come back, you know, around the definition. But I think what I'm not hearing is support for you know, further elaboration on in the text on you know, then a difference between those, you know, general items and the description of heritage, because it's not a definition, it's a description. So the fundamental needs to point back to, is it property, plant and equipment, or is it an asset held for conservation? And that's the final, you know, that's where the explanation needs to be. So I think the instruction then is to have a look at that in the context of that discussion about the definition, you know, and obviously there can be some explanation and basis for conclusions, but we should not go into detailed drafting about the delineation between, you know, heritage within this. The fundamental decision is, are you in this standard or are you in property, plant and equipment? Okay. So then I think Edwin, move us on to the item 2.2.7.
So the second last paper is on additional implementation guidance and illustrative examples. And there was an SMC on asking if constituents agreed with the examples and the implementation guidance that was provided. And as expected, we had overwhelming requests for more guidance. The one thing that I will point out, though, is that a lot of the topic areas where constituents asked for more guidance was already discussed either in June or earlier in this meeting. So we have already addressed a lot of the points where there was a lack of clarity. The two things that wasn't discussed is on measurement. So in ED92, we did have quite a bit of discussion in the IGs, the implementation guidance, about measurement. And we also described how an entity might come up with a current value. But entities wanted to see how those descriptions or how the implementation guidance would actually look like on a numerical basis. And some of them explicitly asked for examples just to see, you know, how you would come up with a number and then the resulting debits and the credits. So staff's proposal is to add examples on based on the two approaches to determining COV. One is based on a market approach using an appraisal data or appraised value. And we actually found live examples of that in Europe, where for certain reservations, the governments did actually get an appraisal value based on, you know, the features of the land and the features or the specific species of plants and animals that were in there, and somehow they were able to come up with an appraisal value and use that in determining their current value. And then the other example is estimation of COV based on the cost approach. And staff plan to come up with a scenario where an entity is essentially accumulating the cost that would be needed to develop a similar asset and coming up with a COV that way. So that's the two examples that we propose to add. The other topic area is going to be covered in the next paper, and it's on unit of account. So I'll pause there and see if members have any comments.
Thanks, Edwin. So open for comments on the proposal to add those two examples. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether my question is on this item or actually on the next one, because I think there's a blurring in my mind between the two. And I have to confess, I'm sort of still struggling a little bit around the unit of account and exactly how you deal with it. And
can we go on to that one next?
Yeah, well, it's slightly linked to example 2, which is why I put my hand up here, but maybe I'll keep my powder dry and we'll cycle back to that if we need to, if that's okay.
Okay, thanks. So really, I'm just open for comments on the proposal to add those two examples, perhaps rather than how that's done. Sunjin. You're on mute, Sunjin.
Sorry about that. I made the same mistake. And this is not my opinion, but a question to Edwin to teach myself. So how that cost approach is applied to this tangible natural resource for conservation? Can you explain a little more about that? Because the meaning of cost approach, it sounds like to me, it sounds like things require certain artificial or human touch or something like that. So, quite contrary to the definition of natural resource.
Right.
Thanks.
So, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Edwin.
Yeah. So when we looked at IPSASB 46, I guess the goal of coming up with a COV is something, the cost to develop an equivalent or similar asset, but that doesn't mean it has to be something that's natural. So we were thinking we could have a scenario where you're essentially planting a forest that results in a forest that's the same, that has the same features as a natural forest. But it doesn't mean that it has to be something that's completely natural. You could have something that's seeded by like man-made essentially, but ends up having the same type of asset.
Okay, so thanks for that, Edwin. So I think it's one of those things, Sunjin, where let's see the draft example and hopefully that will get you there. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other flags raised against that proposal to add those two examples. So I think probably the best thing then is to move on to unit of account, and then Karen will come back in on that one. Okay, so we're fine to add those examples, so move us on then.
Okay, so the last paper is on unit of account, and so this wasn't really a major comment from respondents. We did get one or two comments asking for additional guidance, but when you read about the detailed topics that they wanted more guidance on, staff thought, well, there's already a lot of guidance on unit of account in the core text, the application guidance, and the implementation guidance. And in fact, there's more guidance in ED92 than any other IPSAS out there on unit of account. So because of that, the staff's initial view was that there is no real need to come up with additional illustrative examples on unit of account because there is already a very robust set of implementation guidance that talks to this issue. So, and then I would also like to remind the board that we actually did have this debate back when ED92 was being developed. And if you recall, we thought about the way we thought about whether we should come up with examples is we thought, well, is the core text sufficient in terms of explaining the principles? If not, we would develop application guidance. And then if needed, we would develop implementation guidance. And if something numerical is needed to illustrate the implementation guidance, then we would finally come up with an illustrative example. So we did think about unit of account when we applied that thought process. And back then, a decision was made to not have an illustrative example on unit of account. So that's why staff continue to have that view. But based on comments I've received and based on what Karen is alluding to, I think some of the board members would like input on this area. So I'll take the slide down and listen to board members' comments.
Okay, thanks, Edwin. So, Karen, are you okay to lead us off on this one?
Thanks very much, Chair. And I should say, first of all, that I'm in line with comments earlier. I'm not supportive of a rules-based approach. I think judgment is absolutely the principal driver of what gets recognised and what doesn't. And this may be an educational point for me, and if it is, I'm very happy to take it offline. But I am struggling with probably the extent of kind of human intervention here in something that is naturally occurring and what our intentions are around that. So the thing that I was thinking of, going back to our rare and endangered species, if there is some kind of breeding program, for example, for a rare or endangered species, would we expect that to be capitalized? At what point? If we think it should be, at what point would it be capitalized? I'm probably a little bit concerned about things being capitalized that we might not expect. So sort of unintended consequence of this, and really, how far does kind of human intervention go? Because that's likely to be where costs come from, and that's why I raised it on the previous one, because you were talking about costs there. If this is something purely for my education, I'm very happy to take it offline, but I'm kind of struggling a little bit to see how those things come together and relate to the unit of account, and particularly as this is such a new area. I'm wondering to what extent this is just me asking the question, or whether this will be a common question that gets asked, and do we need to do a bit more in terms of clarity around what we're expecting, and then of course judgment is applied. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Karen. Ross, just before I go back to Edwin, could I check, did we have any comments on this from Andrew or Angela or anybody who's not attending today?
So there are unit of account comments from Andrew, and I'll let Edwin read those in. I don't see any comments from anyone else who's not in attendance on this.
Okay. Edwin, do you want to just play those in? Just
Yeah,
so
I actually got an email from Gally right before the meeting with a comment from Angela as well. So both of them did say that they wanted more examples on unit of account, but I did not get details on what specific examples they wanted. So I think after the check-in, I'll reach out to both of them to see if they have specific ideas or specific examples that they want to work in.
I mean, I think this may well be one that if both those members have, I think that, what we can't do is work with, we need more examples. I think this is an area where I would suggest actually that you reach out to both of those members and understand what their specific proposals are, because I think we do need specific proposals to fix this rather than floundering around on it. And then I would suggest actually that there is actually we convene a meeting, which I would include Karen in, with some specific proposals in terms of either elaboration of text or an additional example. I would not advocate for more and more examples, which will only create more and more confusion. I think it needs to be what are the specific concerns and what specific additional guidance needs to be added. So I think if members are okay that we go that route. If there is anybody else that feels that they would like to be part of that discussion, then if you can please contact Edwin on that, because I think we need to nail this one ahead of the board meeting in September. That's okay. Good. Okay. Thank you, Edwin. So is there anything else then on that item? Sorry, overall on tangible natural resources. Okay. So I think we have a clear way forward then in terms of decisions on the key items, and we're going to need to see back, particularly, I think, that that issue about what is within the scope of this standard and what is in PP&E, and that ties in with the definition discussion we'll have in September. We'll see a proposed draft final pronouncement. And again, Edwin, if that can be in markup based on the changes that the board's decided from the exposure draft, then we can see clearly what's proposed, and we'll have a page flip on that in September, so that we understand where the remaining issues actually are at that point in time. Okay. Any other points then? Not seeing any flags up, so thank you, Edwin, for those papers.
Thanks.
So I think at that point we will take a 10-minute break. So if we can come back at 20 past whatever hour it is for you, unless we have anybody, I don't think we have anybody in the half-hour time zone. So 20 past, and then we'll move into discussion of climate-related disclosures. Thanks very much, everyone. Okay, so we'll just wait for everyone to switch on their cameras, or members to switch on their cameras, and then we'll get going again. Okay, so we now move on to item 3, which is climate-related disclosures. And we've got a series of papers from Karen and Alex to move us forward on that. So without further ado, Karen, maybe I go to you first to start off with.
Thanks, Ian. Alex will share the slides. He can start us off.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, thank you, Ian.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I wasn't sure which
No
one.
worries.
That's fine. That's fine. Good.
Okay, to you, Alex. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian. Excellent. So really good to be connecting with everyone on the board now to further progress our climate-related disclosures project after a really important meeting in June with the decision to split the project into 2 phases. And I'm actually really pleased with the progress that we've been making in this meeting now, what we've brought to you for the papers in terms of the 3 areas that we'd look to cover, and as well as then looking ahead to a draft SRS1 and the next steps for the project overall to come to that. So we're going to be discussing the transition reliefs that are included in the first substantive paper. We'll be looking at timing and location of reporting, so that'll go over to Karen to do that. And we've also included here the analysis for other issues on SMC 10. And I think this is one really deserves a shout out for Karen, because this was the SMC that just did an open question to all constituents on whatever other issues they might have. And that takes a substantial amount of analysis that Karen was leading on to then bring that forward to the board. So a quick shout out for you on that one, Karen, for the great work in presenting that and providing the analysis there. And when we get to number 4, then this will give us a moment to reflect on this high-level structure that you'll have seen in the draft paper, as well as thus being able to then take advice on moving forward to the full draft itself and the next steps in the project. So really exciting to be able to do all of that. But to start us off, we're going to begin with agenda item 3.2.2, looking at transition reliefs. And you'll have seen in the paper here that we had strong alignment, of course, across the IFRS S2 and S1 with the transition reliefs that are applicable in the private sector context. So that's what you'll see on the slide here, listed as transition reliefs 1, 2, and 3. We, of course, had a 4th transition relief in the ED, but this related to the public policy programs perspective. So this isn't presented here where we're focusing now on phase 1 of the project, on the own operations guidance. And what we did here as staff was then to divide the feedback that we got back into these 2 elements in understanding the response in regards to transition reliefs. The first is whether the relief itself was considered appropriate, looking at this list of 3 where it is aligned to IFRS S2. Second element then is whether the transition timeline, the length of that relief, was had any feedback coming in from constituents. And the summary that you'll see from the slide here is that when we look at that first element, when we look at whether reliefs were considered appropriate, all 3 of these had really strong support and general agreement coming from constituents. If that's from comparative information in the first year, it's a very understandable one. Climate-related risk disclosures being issued at the same time as the financial statements. So this is connecting us to the timing of reporting paper that we have coming up as well. And then finally on scope 3 GHG emissions, where for all of these, the draft sets out that this would be a 1-year relief that's provided. And the general feedback being that all of these, as the description of the reliefs, are appropriate. But when we look at the transition timeline, so whether that first year of reporting is sufficient, for the first comparative information, strong support for that from constituents, that's the appropriate timeline. When we looked at climate-related disclosures, largely the same, seeing that there was support for the proposed timeline of the 1 year, but there were a few respondents coming back telling us that there would be a longer-term challenge for public sector entities beyond that 1 year transition in being able to provide disclosures on your climate related information at the same time as the financial statements. Very often that was articulated as a capacity constraint for entities that wouldn't be only addressed by transition. For that one, I'll defer to Karen to then take you through the timing and location of reporting paper. Going to come up after this. But on the final transition relief on scope 3 GHG emissions, this is one that had a very strong response back from constituents to the board, where there was a message that the 1 year transition relief was felt to be insufficient. And typically, the view would be that the relief should be extended to between 2 to 5 years. Some actually saying in excess of 5 years. But really the main range that we saw here was a proposal of extending the scope 3 GHG emissions relief to beyond the 1 year to 2 to 5. So you'll have seen in the paper then, before I take us to a specific slide focusing on scope 3 and the rationale of staff's recommendation there, you'll have seen in the paper actually a specific focus on proportionality. And I did want to actually bring that out for members as you're thinking about transition reliefs and what's appropriate here within the draft SRS1. And for proportionality, you'll have seen in Appendix B that there are 2 proportionality mechanisms that are included within the draft standard. The first of those is undue cost or effort, which you'll know from the financial reporting side, as well as consideration of skills, capabilities, and resource. And I know, Scott, you were in touch with Karen and I in advance of the meeting, saying that you found Appendix B in that table particularly helpful as something that we might want to reflect on as well. But one that actually, if you think about the reliefs and provisions that are provided to preparers, I think it's maybe a fair direction to the board here, or a suggestion to the board, I should say, to think about transition alongside the proportionality mechanisms that exist within the exposure draft and within proposed final pronouncement. So that's going to hopefully give you that useful background of Appendix B and take us on then to the Scope 3 relief and propose to extend that. So this was, as I said, a very clear message coming back from constituents, calling on the IPSASB to provide a longer transition timeline for reporting of Scope 3 GHG emissions. And typically what we saw here was more of the rationale at the top end of the analysis. It's included on the slide here. So very often we heard from constituents saying that they felt that the public sector context was particularly complex and there'd be challenges in applying Scope 3 emissions. And this is one in the staff's view, though, that isn't particularly unique to the public sector. That there are significant challenges in applying the Scope 3 guidance that exist across both public and private sector context. But important to acknowledge that that is very much the case, and a strong message that came through. Another aspect of this is actually looking at the data maturity that we see across public sector. There are, of course, good insights that we're getting from the Sustainability Implementation Forum, which are telling us that there's good progress, particularly around Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And of course, in making progress on Scope 1 and Scope 2, those are very often the Scope 3 emissions of another entity. So if we're looking at the way in which we're extending these requirements over time, having Scope 1 and 2 come into effect first, and then moving to Scope 3 means there's overall development of that data maturity across the public sector that's going to support with adoption implementation. But finally, I think one that really stuck home for staff was this last bullet on the GHG protocol, which at the time of the IPSASB achieving the final pronouncement for IFRS S1 and S2, the GHG protocol was not under revision. It was a final standard in place, and they came out with the 1 year transition relief. But we find ourselves in a different circumstance. So at this point, the Scope 3 guidance is under review as part of a larger revision across the GHG protocol by the WRI. And the intention is at the moment that that guidance would be finalized by the end of 2027. And I think that's probably an ambitious timeline, we'd say, as well in international standard setting. That could slip. There could be longer period that's required. And the view of staff in this is that we do need to reflect on the fact that this is in some way a moving target. So public sector preparers, in our view, should be given the time to ensure that they're able to align with the revised international standard. And this extension from 1 to a proposal of 3 years would support with that new guidance coming into place. Then maybe the final thing I'd say, there's a last section on the transition relief paper that focuses on the rationale around the 3-year extension. There's a few different areas that come out in that, but I would say, without kind of going through all of those arguments again, that I think there is a level of judgment around this. So you could go ahead, 2 years was discussed by staff, as was 3 or 4, but on balance, we felt that 5 years doesn't really achieve the desired objective in terms of just the long delay in being able to achieve overall compliance and meeting user needs in terms of sustainability information from public sector entities. 1 or 2 years not actually then making sufficient progress in terms of building the data maturity and seeing that change with the GHG protocol. So that brings us to the proposal of a 3-year transition timeline specifically for scope 3, and then retaining the other 2 with 1 year transition relief. So Ian, I may be happy to hand back to you now with that overview on transition reliefs.
Okay, thanks very much, Alex, for that presentation. So if you want to take the slide down now, and we'll open up for comments from members on those proposals. So maintain 1 year for the other 2, and then 3 years for greenhouse gas protocol. Yeah, so I've got Claudia and then Yukuba.
Thank you very much. So I support the suggestion from the team regarding the scope 3 emission, following the explanation to reduce a little bit the burden for the public sector, implementation in a challenging environment. I still following the arguments regarding the publishing the climate-related disclosures at the same time as the financial statements. I still hope maybe we could give them also the 3-year transition period, because one of the responses we received is that there's a capacity problem or an issue. And if we want to boost our adaptation of our standards, it could be helpful that they have a little bit more time just in the starting point to produce this product with the same stuff until the processes are implemented and everything. Alex mentioned in Appendix B, we have the proportionality mechanism, and there is capability is not constrained regarding the identification of risk and opportunities. It's only related, I think, more or less to scope 3. So that's why if it's really necessary to make it that narrow, because for me it looks like then we maybe reduce a little bit the willing of our public sector entity to start. It's like if we have IPSAS 33, we have this 3-year transmission period. So it's to get the public sector in the process. If they have this 3-year, I hope then they said, okay, yeah, we can do this. Otherwise, they wait until they are able to start with delivering this reports or statements. Yeah, that's my suggestion.
Okay, thanks, Claudia. So what I'm going to do is I'll take Yukuba and Scott's comments next, and then go back to Scott. Yukuba.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I am in favor of the recommendation, but when I read the paper, in Appendix A, I'm seeing that in paragraph 31C that we are still referring to public policy programs. And to me, if you look at the exposure draft, paragraph 26 is dedicated to public policy. So if we are going through separate standards, to me, we need to redraft that one. Thank you.
Thanks, Yakuba. I think the reference you've seen there was to what was in the exposure draft. So obviously it's been superseded by the discussion we had in the last meeting. Alex, just to confirm on that before I go to Scott.
Yes, that was right. So the transition paper was setting out all of the reliefs that were in the ED, and of course, then it also references that we're removing the one that you've mentioned there, Yakuba. So that's
so yeah, obviously public policy programs comes out going forwards. Scott, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Couple points. Yes, Alex called me out on Appendix B. I like that. I think it's very informative. So I would encourage us to figure out some way to incorporate it going forward. I think it does help. I know you're leveraging IPSASB on that, but that's an example of how them being ahead of us helps us as we go forward. So I think that was a very good idea to be able to do that. Relative to the greenhouse gas scope 3, I'm totally comfortable with the 3 years. And I wouldn't go more than that because people wait. I mean, it's just the way it is. But I think there is a public sector difference. And that is, if you think about over the last 20 years, corporations have been publishing sustainability information, and public sector hasn't been as much. There's been some, but there hasn't been enough. So I think there is standalone public sector difference with it. I agree with what you have there, but I have no problem saying there's a public sector difference there. Relative to Claudia's comment about the 1 year, I don't feel strong either way. But remember, the standard allows people to report where they are. Okay, so if they don't have a lot, they can tell us they don't have a lot. Okay, and I think so. I think there is something in going with that to encourage them to get in reporting with that area, and I think over time we'll see those disclosures grow as they get better at it. So, but if the board wants to do more, that I don't feel strong about that. I could go with more time there, but keep in mind a lot of that data is narrative that's in there that's going to be there. So I would be concerned if they don't have it. As a matter of fact, a lot of that data can then be actually prepared before year end. And that's in that report if you look at it. So I think I'd encourage the board to stay with 1 year there. Thank you.
Okay. So I think I'm clearly hearing support then for the extension to 3 years in respect of greenhouse gas protocol. I think probably as Scott has said, there might be some arguments in terms of the state of development that would create a public sector reason to extend the period in terms of publication at the same time. I think that was the one that you were concerned about, Claudia, wasn't it? And I think that's where clearly, if we were to take a different approach, then we would need to focus on that public sector difference. So with the decision that we extend greenhouse gas transition to 3 years, I just want to take comments from other members back on Claudia's counter proposal that we extend. And I think in extending, though, I think as Scott made the point, that the longer you give, it just gives people a delay to focus on implementing something. We've seen that so many times over. So I guess then if there is an argument, the question is it 2 years rather than 1? Because I think extending for 3, 4, 5 years, people will just not do anything on it. So I'd like to take comments on that specific one and your views on, if we do it, what the reason is for the public sector and what the appropriate timescale would be. Karen.
I'm in favour of keeping with staff proposals on this and not granting an additional exception here. I think people will take as long as you give them, and I think that if there are jurisdiction-specific issues, then clearly that jurisdiction can determine its own timeframes. I think it's confusing to have multiple different transition periods. So I think if you were going to do it, it would be 1 or 3. But I think everyone will have something that they can report. And so on that basis, I prefer to stick with staff proposals.
Okay, thanks, Karen. I saw a number of nods in support of that. Any other comments? Mary.
I have a similar view with Claudia, and so we have public sector has so many different circumstances, and so especially the relation when we consider the relationship between the financial general purpose financial reporting and the climate related sustainability reporting, and so it is so difficult issues to we have to face. So we have to carefully consider about the transition time and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I mean, I think it is one of these things where, there clearly are differences of view, and I guess it would just be, I would just like to take a show of hands at this point in time just to see where the board is on this issue. So maybe if I can just ask everyone to raise their electronic hand if they are in support of going with staff's proposals. All right, okay, that's me. I can't find mine, but anyway.
So I'm counting 10 hands, so that's 8 electronic hands and 2 physical hands, the chair and Jonah, and that's 10 of 15. I'll make that 9 electronic hands and 2, so that's 11.
Okay.
And we've got 11 of 15 because we have 3 apologies today.
Okay. And can I just check then whether there are anybody who is definitely against the staff recommendation? And we'll check just abstentions. I'm just interested at this stage where the board actually is on this.
So I'm not seeing any electronic hands or hands raised for against.
I'm sort of assuming from what they said that Mary and Claudia would be against the staff proposal, but then abstentions? Oh, so abstaining. Okay, Claudia.
So we still have a bit of a gap there, but I think it's
Yeah.
the majority of members are in support of this staff proposal.
So, I mean, I think just from a process point of view, obviously we don't have, a 2/3 majority on it. I think clearly there is a leaning within the board to maintaining staff's proposals. I think given that we haven't got the other board members, but my proposal would be that in moving this forward, we go with maintaining staff's proposed approach of not changing in a draft, but clearly we will need to just check in on that when we get to the September meeting.
So on that, Ian, just to clarify from the staff perspective, we will take forward and do the drafting on the basis that this is a board-supported decision. I think
we will need to. I think we should specifically ask the members who are not present whether they, what their position is on it, and then depending on whether we have the requisite 2/3 through that process, then we will go with it. If we have a much more mixed picture, then we will have to have another discussion on this in September. Is that okay?
It is, but I was going to propose that we just bring the drafting back and the board look at the drafting rather than another paper on this. Because to be honest, there's no more for staff to do in terms of analyzing this. The board needs to make a decision. We're either adding a couple more or we're going with the staff recommendation. So,
Yeah.
and we've got
Yeah.
a lot to do in September. So if we want to get to our goals on this project, these types of issues, we have to clear them off.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll go with that approach. So no additional paper. And also, if we get support for maintaining the 1-year transition through just that email responses, then I think we go with it, and that's it. Okay. Okay. Thanks for that. Alex, I think then we're through on that.
Yep. And
Yeah.
we're moving to the next agenda item, 3.2.3 on timing and location reporting. So the ED proposals are consistent with what is in IFRS 2, and in Appendix B to our requirements, you can find that the ED requires entities to report climate-related disclosures at the same time as GPFRs, and also provide climate-related disclosures as a part of its GPFRs. Next slide, please. So overall, we've seen a mix of responses. There are respondents that cited the benefits of the proposed timing and location reporting, that it provides a complete set of information for decision making, and also strengthens the connectivity between financial information and also climate related information. And of course, this is also in alignment with what is in private sector guidance. But there were also some concerns raised, for example, in relation to timing of reporting. There are concerns related to the availability of climate data and how that would align with the financial reporting cycle. Concerns with the resource constraints in doing so. So as Claudia has noted for the previous agenda item, and also whether it was necessary to report certain disclosures such as governance and strategy on an annual basis. And in relation to location reporting, there are concerns that the same assurance requirements would be expected to be applied for climate-related disclosures as with financial statements if they're in the same report. And also some respondents argued that entities should be given the flexibility to provide information in a location that is most meaningful for users, so such as presenting it on a website instead of in GPFRs. But overall, we saw good support, and there was really good reasoning as well provided from respondents that supported the proposed timing and location reporting to reporting within GPFRs and also reporting them simultaneously. And when we went through the responses, we also noted that the ED does provide guidance which should address respondents' concerns. We do have transition provisions as we discussed in a previous agenda item, and also guidance on the timing of secondary data that entities that secondary data might originate from a different time frame. And with some further research that was conducted on the staff side, we also identified some jurisdictional examples which supported the proposed timing, allocation, and reporting in the public sector. So overall, we didn't identify a public sector specific reason as to why we would diverge from private sector guidance, and our recommendation here is to retain the proposed requirements for timing and location reporting to report climate-related information at the same time as GPFRs and as a part of GPFRs. So with that, I'll pass it over to the chair to facilitate the discussion.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So open up for comment on staff's proposals to retain the original proposals. Karen, you're first, and then Sunjin.
Thanks very much, Chair. So I support the information being presented at the same time and generally in the same location. I'm a supporter of integrating the climate information with the financial information. I think there's a lot of benefits in doing that. I am concerned at what that will do to the size of GPFRs. We know that many find them inaccessible as they are. They're quite large and they don't have a big readership. And I'm concerned that it will get full of more data, but not necessarily information. And I think we should be mindful of that. I think there is a public sector difference here in that our users are quite different to those that the IFRS, the ISB standards are targeting, who, one might argue are more sophisticated users or have got specialist knowledge. Whereas, our primary audience are, I would say, not so knowledgeable or sophisticated in this, and we need to make it easy for them to access the information that is really important. So I was thinking about whether actually everything needed to be in the GPFRs or could be accessed through the GPFRs. So and that reflects the points that you were making, that some data might not change very often. And so, can we have that in an accessible format but not repeat it every year? And also there may be some data that doesn't change annually, it changes on a different cycle to that. So I think providing some flexibility on location, but with some kind of, but with the principle though that you are trying to provide some kind of integrated reporting, might be a way of trying to make sure that we've got really good information for the users of public sector GPFRs without kind of overburdening it, because there's a danger, where I'm going with, I think, is that, less can be more in this, in terms of really being able to tell a story that users want to understand. And I think we really need to consider that to really hit the mark here. So thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I might just ask staff to come back in a moment because I suspect it's something that has been on the IPSASB's minds. So anything on that they've done on that. Sunjin next, and then Renee.
Okay. It's about the timing and location of sustainability information. I'm afraid the first year relief may not be enough for some public sector entities, especially for government entities. And I'm actually in favor of making it as permanent relief. I'm saying that because sometimes this overall measurement, reporting, and verification mechanism for especially climate information, that can be connected other regulatory or administrative framework. For example, in Korea, those same greenhouse gas emission information measured and verified, that information will be used for emission trading system, ETS system as well. And that system have different kind of timeline for measurement and reporting. So end of March, end of June, and final decision going to be made on September, October, something like that. If that is the case, and if that system is not changed, then the meeting deadline for financial reporting would be very, very difficult, or sometimes the similar work should be done twice. I don't think that's doable in public sector context, because most of work procedures oftentimes stipulating in the regulation or law. So unless this reporting standards affect rule change in those administrative procedure or other deadlines, some, not all, but some government entities may feel hardship in adopting the standards. So I'm concerned that if there's no permanent relief on that one, it can be a deal breaker for some government entities. So that's the concern I have.
Thanks, Sunjin. I mean, I think this is the challenge that we have as an international standard setter versus national. And the trouble is we don't have any knowledge overall of what those specific jurisdiction challenges are in terms of time frame, and also whether they can be changed, because I think what this is catalyzing is a change in reporting and a more integrated approach to reporting. So I think, bearing in mind that our standards can only be adopted through jurisdiction relief, I think then what we have to focus on here is what is the principle that we are trying to communicate in terms of better reporting in this space. And if there are problems at jurisdiction level, then the jurisdiction will need to sort those out either by changing the requirements for those other reports to bring them in line, or then they would need to give a specific relief, that's appropriate for that jurisdiction. So I think we have to focus here on what is the principle in terms of actually the aim is to have that information together and accessible so that it is there for accountability purposes. So I think that's the challenge we face across all our literature, but obviously here particularly because we're trying to affect change. Ross, I'll just bring you in and then I'm going to Renee.
Yeah, I just wanted to underline that point you're making, Ian, and how important that is as a signal from the board internationally with this first standard, because national jurisdictions almost always add their own additional relief for local issues. So, for example, if we say, well, you can have 3 or 5 years of transition because this is hard, you can be sure when they adopt it in 2-3 years after we put the standard out, they're going to add more. So I think there is some balance that's in being sensitive to the implementation challenges that are there, but also that the global best practice is to align the timing of reporting and on all these issues, and that we're sensitive and have given some relief. But it's a slippery slope if we start adding more and more relief on the international standard, because then when it is adopted at jurisdiction level, and we've seen this with the accounting standards, there's always additional scope outs, carve outs, relief provided at the local level. So just wanted to play that in. I think it's really important.
Okay, thanks, Ross. So take Renee and then Scott, and then I'm going back to staff.
Yes, thank you. I'm supportive of staff's recommendation here. I find that many of the comments we heard from constituents being cautious or pushing back on location, I wasn't sure that I wasn't sure that it was clear that we're offering an option, that we were not mandating to insert the climate-related disclosure in the GPFR. We are suggesting to adopt the IPSASB's approach to have the option to insert it or to cross-reference it to another document. So I'm very supportive of this. I don't know if it's a matter of being clearer in our guidance, because I was a bit surprised by the number of comments we got on this. It seems like there wasn't an appreciation for the fact that we are providing flexibility. And I support Karen's comment and word of caution, but again, I think that what we're proposing is allowing that flexibility. And it's a good balance between providing flexibility, but also from a principles-based perspective, making sure we're achieving an interconnectivity between the financial information and the climate-related disclosures. And to me, the GPFR need at a minimum to cross-reference to somewhere else where the climate-related disclosure is provided in parallel at the same time. So I think that's what our proposals are achieving, and that's why I'm comfortable with it.
Okay, Karen, just briefly to comment on the accuracy of what Renee's just said there.
Yeah, thanks Renee, and thanks for board members' comments. I just like to echo Renee's point on cross-referencing information, that there is a disclosure guidance on cross-referencing information, and we have highlighted that in the paper as well, where entities are able to include information by cross-reference if that information is available at the same term and at the same time as its GPFRs, and that with the IPSASB's disclosures, with the IPSASB's decision on location of disclosures, it really came from the reason of connectivity, supporting connectivity between between climate-related information and also financial information, and also when the IPSASB finalized its general requirements, so it's our S1, our general requirements equivalent, so the S1, there was also a lot of support on their side for this cross-referencing flexibility, where entities could really just cross-reference those existing reports.
Okay, thanks, Karen. And I guess that does then go to Karen's comment, but it may well be that we need to make sure that that's clear in the final standard, that is absolutely the option that people can take. So I think that would be helpful. Scott, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I just want to speak in support of this, but also highlight what Ross said. I think we ought to be very clear about the principle about the interconnectivity between this information, so you can actually see the impact of climate on the financial. That is, I think that's the principle that we're putting forth. And so to decouple that really is violating the principle we put in there, whether you get it in cross-reference or not. So I think we ought to make that clear in what we're talking about. And people always bring up, oh, it's not available, but you put the most current information in. Say you put something from 6 months ago instead of waiting. So does it make sense to hold the whole report up because you're waiting for one piece of information for 6 months, or go on and put it all together in one place, realizing you've got information from the previous year in there instead of waiting for the whole delay to be able to send that in? And this is sustainability information. It doesn't move that quickly. Okay, so I don't think anybody's going to be misled by having to put information at 6 months in there, or as opposed to waiting to hold up all the information for that information. So I think hanging tight with the principle about interconnectivity is important here.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Mary.
Thank you. And I support the staff's recommendation. However, do we have to pay much attention to the difference between the public sector and private sector? I support the importance of the connectivity between the finance GPFR and the sustainability reporting. And however, there is maybe in the public sector, there its own operation and public PPP, public policy program, and it is a different aspect from the private sector, because the PPP, the effect has a long and mid-term or long-term perspective, and so we have to pay attention, consider carefully about the connectivity between the GPFR and the public policy program. And so we have, from my point of view, it is important for us to consider carefully. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I mean, I think you've just underlined there the reason why we agreed that we will take forward PPPs as the second phase here, because there are maybe some areas where there is a difference of perspective compared to own operations. So we'll need to look back on that when we do have those discussions next year in terms of public policy programs. So I think on this one, I think what I'm hearing is overall support for the principle and affirming the consistency with S2, but actually really drawing attention in terms of BCs and so on, in terms of that fact that there is that option to cross-reference, and that is important. Then, to Karen's point, in terms of actually trying to make the disclosures as succinct and focused as possible, to tell the story as clearly as possible and as concisely as possible, bearing in mind, we know that there is a general concern about the length of GPFR information. Okay, so everyone happy with that as the way forward? Okay, good. Thank you for that. So then I think that moves us on then to the next paper. And Karen, that's you.
Yep, thanks. Thanks, Chair. So in moving on to agenda item 3.2.4, covering other issues in SMC 10. So this was something that we first discussed in the April meeting, where we identified those and summarized those other issues that that respondents raised in relation to the ED, and this SMC was intended to capture all remaining comments. So these are all issues that have been raised by between one to a few respondents in relation to the ED. So there is a full analysis of each issue identified, which is shown in Appendix B of the paper, Appendix C of the paper. There's a full staff analysis and full recommendation, but overall we propose no changes for the issues identified for adaptation and mitigation. So where some respondents asked for a better balance between two aspects, additional definitions where some respondents suggested revisions to the definitions that are aligned with IFRS S2, climate financing mechanisms, we'll come back to that later, and then climate stress testing in relation to adding a requirement for stress testing in addition to scenario analysis, and also connectivity with financial statements, so enhancing the connectivity with an entity's financial statements. We'll come back to issue C on climate financing mechanisms because we are recommending a non-authoritative illustrative guidance for that one. But then looking across all the other four issues that are listed on this slide where staff propose no changes, we like to check if board members have any comments regarding any of the staff recommendation on these issues. So I'll pass it over to the chair.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So as Karen has said, we will come back to climate financing mechanisms where there is a proposed change, but just at this stage, want to check that members are content that we proceed as proposed with issues A, B, D, and E there. So if you can take that down now, Karen, and we'll just check whether there is any disagreement with that way forward, and we'll come back to look at C in a moment. Claudia.
Thank you. Just for clarification, for the topic additional definitions, there in the Appendix D, there's something just a description that there will be reconsidering of the term own operations that we will see in the September meeting. Is it right?
Yes. So yes, that's correct. So some of the responses highlighted that own operations was used to loosely refer to scopes 1 and 2 emissions in the greenhouse gas protocol. It's not a defined definition, but it's used to loosely refer to that group of emissions. But then with that comment, and now with the phased approach that we're considering, which gets it to a closer alignment with IFRS 2. We think from the staff side that there is, we'll see when we get to the drafting stage as to whether as to the extent of whether we need that terminology for our own operations.
Okay, but let's not get into deliberating that now. Yep. We're just going to come back to that, but that's the origin of that comment, if that's okay. Karen, I'll go to you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I support staff recommendations that nothing extra is needed, but I did have a question on proportionality. Actually, it came up elsewhere where there is a reference to undue cost or effort. I understand that has had some difficulty in application in the private sector, just generally in terms of kind of how you do it. And I'm not aware that it's been used much in the public sector before. And I wanted to know to what extent you've given any consideration to how entities might apply that, and whether guidance is needed about applying that as a concept or principle.
I think this is this is something that we've also found when we were doing our research that was available on in private sector guidance. Maybe it's from the staff side. We think maybe the first step is to really start communicating this proportionality mechanism. We're aware that a lot of respondents, or even people who are within this sustainability reporting landscape, are not as aware of these proportionality mechanisms. So from the staff side, we think that there might be some work in the implementation phase to work on to further highlight that, and maybe also something that we can put in the BCs.
Ross and Alex, you just wanted to clarify on that.
Not as much of a clarification, of more a point of order, I guess. So I think it's very difficult on our first standard on related to sustainability, when adoption implementation overall in the space is limited, to really have a good sense of how it's going to work when it's implemented. So I think, and I do think the proportionality guidance that's baked into the ISSB pronouncements is quite good. Do appreciate that on implementation, people are starting to come to grips with it and struggling with it. And I don't think we're going to get it perfect out the gate. And we're probably not going to really learn on what's working and what's not till we finish the standard and we do more to see how it's working, and potentially have to update the standard soon after it goes out. So I realize it's kind of the old chicken and egg analogy that comes in English, is like, how is this going to be implemented? But people are struggling to implement because they don't have the principles yet. So I do think we're in a good space building off ISSB's work, because they did think about this when they designed the standard, and proportionality is built into the guidance. Yeah, growing pains happening in the private sector, and I'm sure in the public sector, but I'm not sure, we're going to come up with much to improve on it until we actually get that first standard out the door and people start to apply it. I just wanted to bring that in because we've really kicked this around on the staff side and thought about, like, what else could we do, or where in the public sector could we add more. And really thought about what we heard in the comments, and I think where we come back to is we're probably pretty close to what we need for a starting point. And as we finalize those principles, we can start to use the Sustainability Implementation Forum to really get input really soon after that standard's done, and how people are struggling with it to get input. But you're just not going to get much realistic now, because even in the forum, when we're talking about this, people are reporting on a patchwork of frameworks that aren't consistent with what we're proposing now. They're a little bit lighter. So, there's not really good data yet.
Okay. Alex, back on that. I just want to go, we are going to come on to the next slide in a moment, and proportionality is actually on that next slide in terms of the list of issues. So I just want to conclude on issues A, B, D, and E that there is no change at this stage, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay. Okay, so I think we're okay on A, B, D, and E. So Karen, if you can move us on to the next slide, and we will also pick up C and the proposal there.
Thanks. Thanks, Ian. And in terms of this slide, we have 5 other issues. First is on consolidation. There were respondents that said that we need to be more specific about consolidation. Next one is on metrics and targets, where respondents asked us to consider government policy as a driver towards climate targets and also requiring disclosures of carbon credits purchased. Proportionality, the issue that we covered earlier, but happy to cover it here as well if anyone has any other comments. A statement of compliance, so respondents asking for flexibility to provide a partial statement of compliance, a statement of emissions, where respondents asked if we could have a standardized format of reporting emissions. And a full analysis of each issue is also shown in Appendix C of the paper. And we'd like to check here, pass it over to the chair to see if board members have any comments regarding these 5 issues and the staff recommendation to propose no changes.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So if we can take the slide down, and then I'll just check whether there's any disagreement then. Claudia.
I just have a comment to the topic we have discussed just before about the propriety, proportionality. That's a difficult word. So, because this the term without undue cost and benefit or effort, we know already in our literature in the financial instrument standards, we have in IPSAS 41 the same term, and we use it already. So I'm not struggling with the understanding of this materiality or whatever, how we call them, mechanism. I'm not sure if we need a little bit more, I wouldn't call it guidance or information on what we meet in our public sector context, the consumer rate with the skills, capability, and resources. I think in the public sector, nobody thought about financial resources because the public sector entity is dependent on the budget they received. So the financial they get for doing their services. So if they don't get some additional money to collect the data, we should have to make sure what we mean by consumer rate with the resources that are available to the entity. I think that's the only topic we maybe need a little bit clarification in our standard. If these resources, when I see what I read or what I designed in the private sector standard, that means resources of experts in the public sector preparing the data and not really financial resources. And then we should maybe clear if also financial resources, if we don't have a budget for finance this additional data collection, what it means.
Thanks, Claudia. I think we have to be very careful about that one because basically if we say, well, if you haven't got the budget, you don't have to do it, then that would mean most people would not actually do accruals-based reports because they'd say we don't have the budget for it. So I think that's quite a hard one to build in, but Alex, to you.
Good. Yeah, I think that well said on that one, Ian. And maybe actually just to build on what you've shared there, Claudia, you'll see in Appendix B that the IPSASB earlier this year provided a fact sheet on proportionality. So I've just put that in the chat for everyone to have a quick reference to it. And I think this is actually a really good example of where the IPSASB, when we move hopefully into that implementation phase in early 26, we'd be able to look to this existing guidance that's come out earlier this year from IPSASB to build on these kind of discussions that you're bringing in, Claudia. So that's agreeing to the principle of it now and then turning our attention to implementation for 26. Thanks, Ian.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I think that is going to be really important that we do take advantage of that that guidance, and review that for public sector application. Any other points then on those 5 items? Okay, so I think we move forward on that basis. And I do think, staff can kind of sort of keep a running tally, running list of, sort of candidates for that further guidance, sort of after we approve the standard, that will be helpful. Okay. So then climate financing mechanisms and the proposal there.
Yep, thanks, Chair. And then now moving back to item C on climate finance and mechanisms. And in terms of climate finance and mechanisms, so we're thinking about green bonds, sustainability-linked loans, there was a response that highlighted a need for clearer guidance on disclosing climate financing mechanisms in the ED. And from the staff perspective, we've also heard similar questions reflected from several of our outreach events. But we're also aware that this is not a public sector difference, and that these instruments should be reflected in an entity's GPFS and GPFRs, but also acknowledging that the IPSASB has done some previous work in this area, having issued non-authoritative guidance in both in RPGs 1 and 3 that address the reporting sustainability program information, which includes programs financed through green bonds. So from the staff perspective, we think it would be very useful if we could use the IPSASB's existing work and maybe make a link to it, especially when the principles in the ED can support these related disclosures. So our staff recommendation for the board here is to add an additional non-authoritative guidance, illustrative guidance, and IG to address the disclosures of climate finance mechanisms and how they interact with the standard, how they connect with the standard. And the intention of this IG would be to demonstrate the connectivity between GPFS and GPFRs and also the disclosures in the IPSASB SRS. So for example, for a sustainability-linked bond, which is linked to an entity's sustainability performance and their KPIs, is on one hand, it's reported in their balance sheet, but on the other hand, under the IPSASB SRS, the entity would disclose how these sustainability commitments that it made, the KPIs under its sustainability-linked bond, would contribute towards achieving its overall climate-related targets and its longer-term strategic goals. So we are proposing an additional IG for non-authoritative IG for that. Pass it over to the chair for discussion.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Any views on that proposed way forward by staff on that one? Okay, so I think we're content to proceed on the basis that you've proposed, Karen.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. So Alex, is this you, this one?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Ian. So we're now looking ahead to the next steps for the project. It's really good to have got through the other substantive items there. And here, what we'd actually like to start with is looking at where we are with phase 1 in what we have described here as own operations. We have the really important milestone now coming up of bringing a fully restructured draft back to the board for the September board meeting. And in the papers, you'll have seen agenda item 3.2.5, which sets out at a quite high level a proposed structure there for the September board meeting. And the staff were just putting the question at this point, if there are any members who have comments on that quite high level paper for us to then move ahead with bringing you that fully restructured draft, bringing the own operations IFRS S2 aligned project back to the members.
Okay, thanks, Alex. So Just take the slide down for a moment, and then we'll just check whether there are any comments at this stage in terms of that proposed way ahead. Obviously, it's always easier when you actually see it in practice. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I've got no problem with that way forward. I guess I have a lingering concern given the conversation at the last board meeting around materiality and taking that forward. So I guess it depends on whether there is time to have proper discussion around that, or whether it would be useful to have any further discussions before the meeting to help move things forward, because I know that a number of us were involved in quite a good conversation about how that might be taken forward. So I just didn't know how you were going to handle that, but just recognizing that was quite a significant a sort of loose end from the last discussions. So just noting.
So thank you, Karen. So I mean, we will be looking at the definition of materiality back. We'll have the comments back on that in September. And then I think the question is going to be, we have phases 2 and 3 of the materiality project, including in phase 3, looking at what the IPSASB has provided by way of guidance. And I think it's going to be quite important to centre the conversation then in terms of, given that, we will have firmed up on our definition of materiality across our literature, and then, we can have a look at on that firm basis, then we can have a look at what's already been provided. The question then is there anything else at that stage for the public sector? And I think that's probably the way forward on this one that's proposed, Karen.
And also just adding that we will be having a SIF meeting on I believe August the 28th. So this might be one of the discussions that we might have in that SIF meeting. I think everyone here should have received an invite to that meeting already. It'll be an interesting conversation. So hope to see you there as well.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So yes, the issue is logged, and if you like, that's the proposed way forward, that we start to move through it and work out what, if anything else, is required. Okay, anything else then on the structure? Good. Okay. So Alex, take us back to the slide then in terms of way forward.
Okay, thank you, Ian. So that then, taking us forward on phase 1, we have the timeline coming up here of bringing us through to first the restructure draft, then through to December in-person meeting, where we'd look to have approval of the first final pronouncement. This is focusing on the IFRS S2 aligned guidance. And then some of what we've been talking about today, actually, on 2026, then looking ahead to an implementation phase. And I think, Scott, I remember you talking about this as the crawl, walk, run, and us being able to take a prominent role as a board in supporting on that journey across many different preparers, providing guidance to that effect. So this is the phase 1 aspect on operations. We also then have been looking at phase 2 for public policy programs, where the intention is that we would discuss some of the respective timelines for phase 2 at the December board meeting, and then move in earnest with the first half of 2026, then focusing on developing the public policy program guidance in the second phase of this project, with the intention of a final pronouncement by the end of 2026. So this is the kind of overall forward plan that we have here. To bring it forward to us in terms of the very immediate things, though, as well, Karen, great, you mentioned the Sustainability Implementation Forum, which is on the 28th of August, where invites should already be out for everyone. I think we've had some excellent discussions in that already that have brought some useful insights for board deliberation. It'd be great to see board members there if you're able to make that. We are not planning, though, to have an SRG meeting in advance of the September board meeting. So that was following Karen and I having discussions with Scott on that one. But we would then look to have our regular SRG in advance of December. It's more just a kind of timing issue than anything else, that it's an August meeting where we're not really looking for the kind of strategic level input as we're doing the restructuring of the draft. And we'll be able to kind of return to that, bringing our eyes up to a more strategic view in advance of the December board meeting as we start to, for example, think of that prospective timeline for phase 2. So more just in terms of what's appropriate for that infrastructure that we have in place. So thank you, Ian. I think that's everything in terms of the forward plan there. I'm not sure if you want us to take a moment on that too.
Okay, thanks, Alex. So any other points from board members at this stage? Okay, so I think thank you very much for a clear set of papers there. I think that's allowed us to navigate through quite a long list of issues there. And that puts us in a good place to actually start to consider a first draft of the final pronouncement in September. And I think it's always easier when you can actually see something, in black and white in front of you. Thank you very much for that. So I think with that, we're through all the material for this check-in meeting. So that allows us to give you back half an hour. Ross.
Yeah, Ian, just before we close from the staff side, I just want to thank members for making time available for this check-in. It was an important touch point for us on 2 major projects, and just to ask in advance or apologize in advance from staff to members that based on some of your comments today, it's likely we'll be following up of a couple of you on points as we try to finalize and take forward drafting. We might need some input from members on that. So, I just wanted to warn people in advance that we will be following up. We don't have a lot of time before September. We do have a lot of drafting to do, and we want to make sure that we're directionally going in line with where we've agreed today and with some of the comments that members have been thinking about. So just wanted to make that point today. And I put in the chat, thanks to Renee and Henning for helping with the Sustainability Implementation Forum. It's been a lot of work outside the meeting for that. And both Renee and Henning have been great in joining at all hours of the day for our, when we run that forum, we do it in 2 different times within 24 hours. So it's either really, really late for some of us or really, really early. And it's really been helpful for staff, and we appreciate the support from Renee and Henning. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Yeah, and I think very much thank you from the board. I think that is it's a very important development, and I think we can see a lot of potential for that going forward. So thank you very much to Renee and Henning, and also to staff for really getting the ball moving on that. Okay, so with that, I will close the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for the time. As Ross says, thank you very much in advance for those members that we're going to ask for some additional time between now and September. And look forward to seeing everybody at the forum in Lisbon in September, followed by the board meeting. I think it's going to be a great combination of events, and really looking forward to it. See you all then. And for those in the Northern Hemisphere, enjoy the summer in between. For those in the Southern Hemisphere, I guess it's business as usual, but whatever, stay safe, and we will see you in September. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks very much. See you. Bye.
Bye.